The little pink bakery box sat waiting on the counter when the woman quietly slid it back toward the cashier. Her hands shook as she managed a faint smile, one that couldn't quite cover the ache behind her eyes. Outside, people strolled by with shopping bags and easy laughter, never guessing that across town a 7-year-old boy was waiting for a birthday cake that wasn't coming. Near the window, a single father sipping his coffee happened to notice. He wasn't eavesdropping. Some kinds of pain just carry across a room, no matter how quietly they're held. What started as an ordinary Tuesday morning was about to reshape two families for good, in ways neither of them could have predicted when they woke up that day. Every weekday, Owen Mercer stopped at Maple Hearth Bakery right after dropping his 9-year-old daughter, Harper, at school. It was a small ritual, barely 15 minutes long, but it anchored him. Since losing his wife 4 years earlier to a sudden illness, that quiet cup of coffee had become the one calm moment in his day before the whirlwind of work, pickups, laundry, and homework took over completely. Grief had taught him how fast an ordinary morning could turn unforgettable. One phone call, one hospital hallway, and the whole shape of life could change. It left him with a habit he never talked about, noticing the people quietly struggling under something heavy. The ones who moved through a room like they were carrying more than they could show. That morning the bakery smelled like cinnamon rolls and warm bread, the oven still working through the early batch. Families chatted over breakfast plates. An older couple split a newspaper between them. Soft music drifted low through the room, barely louder than the espresso machine. It was the kind of morning that felt entirely ordinary, the kind Owen usually let wash over him without much thought. But one woman didn't fit the mood at all. She stood frozen at the counter, both hands wrapped tightly around the strap of her purse, staring at a large pink cake box waiting to be picked up like it was something she couldn't quite bring herself to touch. Her name was Marissa Hale, early 30s, dressed in a gray blazer that had clearly seen better days, its cuffs a little frayed at the edges. Her eyes were swollen from too many sleepless nights, the kind of exhaustion that doesn't fully go away with a weekend of rest. Every few seconds she swallowed hard, like she was holding back tears through sheer force of will, blinking fast and looking anywhere but at the employee's face. The young employee behind the counter apologized, explaining gently that the cake was already made, already decorated, sitting there finished and ready. Marissa opened her wallet, counted what little she had inside, a handful of crumpled bills, and closed it again without a word. It wasn't enough, and both of them seemed to know it before she even said so out loud. Quietly, without drama or excuses, she asked if the order could just be canceled. The employee, clearly uncomfortable with where this was headed, explained that the cake had already been personalized with a child's name piped in blue icing across the top. It couldn't be resold, couldn't be refunded, couldn't simply disappear back into the case with the others. Marissa simply nodded. There was no argument in her, no anger, just a kind of tired grace that comes from having absorbed disappointment so many times it no longer surprises you. She thanked the employee for her patience, apologized for wasting everyone's morning, and pushed the cake gently back across the counter before turning for the door, her shoulders a little more bowed than when she'd walked in. Owen couldn't look away. The way she walked, steady, controlled, refusing to fall apart in public, reminded him painfully of himself in the months after his wife died. Moving forward only because there was no other option. Each step heavier than the last, but taken anyway, because stopping wasn't a choice available to him either. As she reached the door, a folded invitation slipped from her purse and drifted to the floor without her noticing. Owen was up and across the room before he'd fully decided to move. On the front, colorful hand-drawn balloons framed the words, "Happy 7th birthday, Mason." Inside was a child's drawing, done in the earnest, uneven lines of a 7-year-old, a stick figure grinning beside a cake covered in candles, and underneath, in careful, practiced handwriting that had clearly taken real effort to get right. "This is going to be the best birthday ever." He followed her out onto the sidewalk and held it out to her. She took it, embarrassed, tears finally rising despite every effort to hold them back. Owen didn't ask a single question, not about the cake, not about the tears, not about anything at all. He just wished her son a happy birthday, plainly and without pity in his voice. She thanked him, quiet and a little stunned, and walked to an aging blue sedan parked across the street, one that coughed slightly when it started. Owen stood there a while longer on the sidewalk, unable to shake the image of that drawing, of a boy who had no idea his cake wasn't coming. Back inside, the cake was still on the counter, blue frosting, a ring of candy balloons. Mason turned 7 written across the top in careful cursive. The employee, once Marissa was gone, explained quietly, almost as if she needed to say it to someone. Marissa used to be a regular here, years back, before her husband died in a construction accident almost 3 years earlier. Since then she'd been working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, rarely spending $1 on herself, and had spent weeks slowly saving up for this one cake. But her car had broken down the night before, something serious enough that it needed fixing immediately, or she'd lose the job that kept her afloat. The repair had swallowed every spare dollar she had. She'd chosen to keep her job over the candles, because a mother has to make that kind of trade sometimes, and no one should have to. Owen looked at the cake for a long moment, then at the employee, and without another word, paid for it in full. When the cashier assumed, naturally enough, that it was a surprise for his own daughter, he didn't correct her. He simply asked for one thing in return, that Marissa never learn who had covered the cost. The employee blinked, surprised, and asked why. Owen only shrugged. He understood something a lot of people forget in the rush to feel good about helping someone. Accepting help is hard enough on its own, without also having to feel indebted to a stranger or ashamed in front of someone who now knows exactly how close to empty your life has gotten. Kindness given quietly costs the giver nothing extra and spares the receiver something enormous. The bakery manager called Marissa later that morning using the number on file for the order and told her there had been a small mix-up. A local kindness fund, she explained, had unexpectedly stepped in to cover the remaining balance, and her cake was ready whenever she wanted to come pick it up. Marissa didn't believe it at first. She asked twice if there'd been some kind of error, some kind of confusion with another customer's order. The manager assured her, gently and patiently, that everything had already been settled, that there was nothing left for her to pay. When she returned an hour later, her hands trembled again, this time for an entirely different reason. She held the pink box against her chest like it carried something far more precious than frosting and candles, which, in a way, it did. Before she made it back to her car, she stood in the parking lot and cried quietly, not because someone had solved every problem crowding her life, but because for the first time in longer than she could remember, life had shown her a small, unearned mercy exactly when she needed it. Owen watched all of it from his truck parked across the street, said nothing, started the engine, and drove off toward work, believing, reasonably enough, that the story had reached its natural end. A stranger had a hard morning, a small kindness had eased it, and now the day would move on the way ordinary days do. He was wrong. That evening, Harper asked if they could drop off some extra groceries the two of them had collected during a neighborhood food drive the week before, boxes that had been sitting by the door waiting for a free evening. Owen agreed without hesitation. It was the kind of small errand that fit easily into a Tuesday night. At the community center, while they sorted donation boxes under fluorescent lights, one of the volunteers mentioned, almost in passing, a recently widowed mother nearby who was struggling to keep up with everything a growing son needed. The address the volunteer read off sounded strangely, unmistakably familiar. It was the same street where Marissa's old blue sedan had turned earlier that day, the same neighborhood Owen had watched her drive toward from his rearview mirror that morning. Without either of them fully realizing it yet, one small act of kindness had already begun quietly drawing 2 very different families toward the same path. A bakery counter, a folded invitation, a food drive, all of it converging in ways too coincidental to be entirely accidental, or maybe exactly as accidental as most meaningful things in life tend to be. Sometimes the smallest gesture doesn't end the moment we walk away from it. Sometimes it's only the first page of a much longer story, one we never expected to find ourselves inside of. Driving home that night with Harper half asleep against the window, the streetlights sliding past in long amber streaks, Owen had no idea that paying for one birthday cake had done far more than simply save a boy's celebration from disappearing. It had restored a grieving mother's fragile faith that strangers could still choose to care about people they'd never meet again. It had reminded a widowed father, in a way he hadn't expected that morning, why his late wife had always believed generosity should never wait for the perfect moment or the safest circumstances. And, Without either of them noticing yet, it had quietly planted the very first seed of a friendship, and perhaps something more, that would go on to reshape both of their families in ways neither could have imagined standing in a bakery on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The biggest miracles, it turns out, rarely arrive with any applause or fanfare. Most of the time, they begin far more simply than that, with someone choosing to notice another person's quiet pain and deciding, before walking away, to do something about it anyway.